Hey, are you the new private? I'm First Sergeant Kep. Come with me and I'll teach you something that should be taught in the hobby, but almost never is. Come on over and let's talk about how to sleep at an event. There is a lot of institutional knowledge and a lot of things gathered from years of experience in all sorts of different climates. So some tips may not apply to where you're going to be reenacting, and there may be things that are important in areas where you live and reenact that we may not know about out here in the Pacific Northwest. But let's talk about how to sleep at an event. Behind me, you have the Sharpshooter Shebang Dominium with all of our shelter halves buttoned together into one nice canvas apartment complex. And right behind me, you see what a typical soldier sleep system would be. It's going to be a 5-pound woolen blanket and a pound painted ground cloth, or maybe even a vulcanized rubber one. And that ground cloth is intended to create a vapor barrier between you and the ground, and that blanket is there to keep you warm. Now, there are a lot of blankets sold in the reenactor market that aren't 5 pounds, but sort of look the part. If you plan on doing a lot of bivouacking or a lot of authentic work in the hobby, even starting out or maybe in the future, the 5-pound blanket is a worthy investment. They can sometimes be hard to get because when makers do a run, they can be pretty limited and they can be really expensive, but they are a worthy investment. And while you may have some buyer's remorse when you get it, it goes away immediately when you have to rely on it, because a blanket and a ground cloth is the Civil War soldier's 12-month, 4-season sleeping system. And you can get a little more protection, especially if you're on the smaller side, and make a fart sack. And you can watch a previous video that we did on how to essentially make a Civil War sleeping bag out of that for a little extra warmth and comfort. And that's it. So a blanket and a ground cloth, and you're done for your sleeping system. But there are a lot of other tips that might help you have a better time at a reenactment, and we'll kind of build out different scenarios just to kind of share some of that knowledge and experience. So one thing you might be asking is like, hey, First Sergeant, what do I do about a pillow? Well, most soldiers didn't have pillows, except unless it was their greatcoat or a knapsack or some old clothing. There's been times I've been out in the field and I've just taken a nap using my canteen as a pillow, and it worked pretty good. There is some documentation that I have come across of an officer who supposedly had an inflatable pillow during the Civil War, which I think would be amazing if someone recreated. But otherwise, you have to be creative with how you're going to sleep. And part of that begins with how you prepare where you're going to sleep. Most events will sort of determine different areas where units are supposed to be, but kind of pay attention to the ground. Make sure you're not going to be sleeping on a rock or on an anthill or a bunch of wasp or something pokey or prickly that's growing there. Sometimes we've been in fields where there's a lot of sticker bushes that can make it pretty difficult to find a comfortable place to sleep. You also don't want it like soggy and wet and gross, because all of that cold air is going to get sucked into your body and give you a really miserable night's sleep. Another added benefit, and this is something that didn't get written down as a soldier's tip until I forget the exact model of the issue of the infantry manual, but as one prior to World War I. And it encourages soldiers, as they find their bivouac site, to dig a hip dip where they plan on sleeping, because it can be tough sleeping on the ground. And if you can cut or scratch out or dig out a shallow impression where your hips are going to be, it will give you a much better night's rest. And sometimes you can just get lucky just by moving your body around on the ground. You might look silly, but you're gonna feel great if you find like a little shallow depression that lines up really well with your body physiology. And then you have to, experiment with what you want to do for a pillow. And like I said, you have like a great coat, which is really comfortable, but a great coat is also a good investment to add to a sleeping system. We typically reenact in the summer, so there's not usually a lot of opportunity to have to wear a great coat because it's not that cold. But most of us who sleep outside, we have a great coat because it's essentially a wearable sleeping bag, and you can kind of wrap up your head with a cape if it gets particularly cold at night. So they're handy for a lot of different reasons. And so like getting, you have your spot picked out that's just right. You have your equipment. Now you have to get through the night. And some key tips to keep in mind here is plan to have something on your head. This is something any reenactor will testify to. You can sleep so much more soundly at night with some sort of sleeping cap. And, I have one that I wear every night that I sleep that I sewed myself. It's just sort of a typical, 19th century sleeping cap with a little pom-pom on it. And then for when I bivouac, I have a wool knit cap that's hand knit that I sleep in. Makes me so much more comfortable throughout the night. And then the other thing when you prepare yourself to go to sleep is you want to make sure that you're wearing as dry of clothing as possible. You don't want to sleep in the same wet, stinky, sweaty shirt that you battled in all day, because that's going to cool your body temperature down way more than if you had a nice dry shirt. So it's always nice to have a spare shirt, even if you're going hardcore. That way you can sleep in something dry that you can put on before you go to bed. The other thing is make sure you don't sleep with your shoes on. Now, it may seem counterintuitive that how can having my shoes off make my feet colder? Well, anyone who's slept outside can tell you it will definitely make your feet colder. But it's also really important that soldiers know how to take care of their feet. So at the end of the day, you should be finding ways to air out and dry out your tired feet, so that way you don't have foot issues. And one of the things that I do with my sleep system is I have a dedicated pair of period correct wool socks that I just use for sleeping in. And so like a knit cap, a clean shirt, and a nice pair of socks, those are my pajamas when I'm seriously out in the field, and I sleep really well. And that's typically for your, sort of spring to summer, maybe early fall seasons, when you don't have a lot of additional weather accommodations to have to consider. But as you get more into the colder months, then we have to talk a little bit about science. And this plays a really key role when trying to sleep outside. So there are two factors that are working against you that you should know about, and that is conduction and convection. So conduction is the sucking of heat out of your body through the ground. And so the ground cloth does give you a little bit of a barrier in the summer months, and you could probably sleep just fine with a ground cloth. I mean, I've done it lots of times. If it's, in the 60s or 70s at night, you barely notice it. But in the colder months, the cold ground will just pull everything out of your body, and you'll have a really rough night. And the other factor that's working against you is convection. So that is the movement of air pulling heat away from your body. So that could be a breeze or maybe a drop in air temperature. And so you have to plan accordingly. So maybe you have issues with getting cold at night because you don't have enough of a vapor barrier or enough insulation between you and your sleep system. I'm getting a little bit older, and I'm not too proud to say that I have your sort of nicer end, like Thermarest, closed cell, accordion style sleeping mat that I'll sleep on. And that's all the vapor barrier I need to sleep like a baby at events. And the nice thing that I found about those closed cell mats is that if you fold your ground cloth in half, it fits perfectly inside and no one can tell. But that's also another tip that I want to share with you, is one of the things that I prefer to do, and it's extra weight. I love carrying 2 ground cloths. One, I'm just a bigger guy, so I can't fit in a fart sack. And sometimes it's just nice, especially if you have like a low dew point, that to have an additional dry layer over your sleep system keeps your wool dry, your blankets dry, and keeps you dry, and kind of keeps that weather at bay. And a ground cloth is also a really good extra level of protection against that convective airflow that might be chilling you a little bit more at night as well. But there are people who manage to, like, very easily disguise like small like backpacking air mattresses under their hardcore gear so they can sleep well and stay comfortable. And this sort of kit also applies even if you sleep in an A tent or a wall tent on a cot. One of the first great tips I got as a new reenactor, once I invested in a cot, was to use my ground cloth to put underneath my sleeping bag. And because like when I noticed that, once I did that, I noticed I was sleeping a lot warmer at night because that cold air, that convective air, was coming up and circulating around my cot and giving me sort of like 360 coolness. But that extra layer of that ground cloth, even in a modern Farby setup, made a huge world of difference in the way that I sleep as well. Now, on some nights, you might be particularly cold. We've bivouacked and survived waking up in 30-some degree weather with ice on our caps and frozen canteens just fine with this gear and a good greatcoat. But other things to consider is like prepare your trip accordingly to meet your needs. So if you are generally a cold sleeper, consider some hand warmers or something that you can stick in a blanket with you. I know they have like hot hands for your socks. They can also tuck away really well in a sleeping bag as well. And on the topic of sleeping bags, I want to get into something that I think that's really important for all of us in the hobby, and that is supporting especially our young and new, like our really new reenactors. So maybe have a young one who's interested in getting into the hobby. Maybe they're really new to sleeping outside and they don't have the gear because like they're kids, and their parents rightly want to see if they're really going to get into this hobby too. And I think for most units, like we want to support people falling in love with the hobby because it is such a great community to be a part of. And so if you don't have this gear, there are some accommodations if you're considering getting started. So especially for you young folks curious about the hobby, if all you have is a sleeping bag, come on out. Like, as long as you talk to the company that you're interested in, odds are they'll allow it. Some super authentic ones, like there's never any leeway. But for the majority of the mainstream hobby, we want to be really accommodating to kind of get your foot in the door. And so that even means, like modern materials in a sleeping bag. But one thing that could really help, and we'd probably ask you, and maybe if we can, we might offer you a piece of loaner gear, is if you need to use like modern camping gear to sleep in, just try to find some sort of affordable wool blanket, either at a secondhand store or a yard sale, something that kind of looks the part that you can cover up your stuff with. So it's not that you have to start out farbless. It's just that you're able to disguise it, because being authentic isn't so much something we do for ourselves. It's a gift that we give the other people that we reenact with. So if you don't have all the right gear, find really clever ways that you can disguise it. So then that way when the public goes home for the night and you're ready to snuggle up to sleep, you're gonna be all set. And a blanket can cover all sorts of needs. And I know there are often like child units with amazing adult supporters and community support for them. And it's not, if you're a young one and you need to bring a stuffed animal with you, do it. Like, we want you to be comfortable getting into this hobby. So just plan for those things to make sure you have the best night's rest. There are tons more tips out there that might be local and regional to you. Things like maybe you're at an event and you're going to need to make sure you cover yourself in some bug spray beforehand, so that way the mosquitoes don't eat you while you're asleep. There might be additional like weather considerations to take into mind, but there's a wealth of reenactor knowledge in viewers and subscribers. And so if you have great tips on how to sleep, please share that with everybody, because we really want this channel to be a resource. And we are so fortunate to have so many people share their great advice on this channel in the comment section. So we hope that this video has been helpful for you. We hope it leaves you a little more prepared and a little more knowledgeable to be able to sleep at a reenactment.